Hey, Off Color fam, this is your producer James with a quick update. We do not have a new episode of Off Color for you today. I am currently in San Francisco working on a new podcast project called The Found Sound, due for release early next year. I'll tell you more about it as we get closer to that date. In the meantime, we thought it would be fun to dip into the archives. We have a few demo episodes that we recorded in the early days of Off Color with our original co-host, Dr. Gregory Diggs, who, as most of you know, sadly passed away just this past February. We got together for a few sessions before we released our first episode just to kind of get the feel for what we were doing and see how our timing and our format could gel. And I've got one of those conversations here for you. It was recorded on November 3rd, 2017. It is the second time we got together. I do want to release the first time, but I'm holding on to that until maybe a little later this year. In the meantime, hope you enjoy it. It's a great episode on its own merits, but it's also a bit of a trip down memory lane. A little longer than most of the recent episodes have been, but didn't want to edit it down. We only have so many hours of material featuring Dr. Diggs, and I really feel a responsibility to put as much material of his out into the world as possible, so I didn't really want to cut it down on you guys. Hope you enjoy it. Check in with us on social media, and we will catch you next time.
You're listening to Off Color, a podcast brought to you by 1.5 Black people and James. I'm Rebecca, the 0.5, and Dr. Diggs, he's the 1. And James, well, James is just James.
Zero.
He's 0 parts black, but we like him anyway.
The podcast is also 1.5 white people. Why don't you try being inclusive? How about that?
I like that.
Oh, man.
That's perfect.
No one should ever say white people are not funny. Okay, now.
Whoever said that?
People say that?
All right. Well, before we really get into it, I want to get into it.
Okay, let's get into it.
Okay? This is it. So I'm about to do a little bit of racism, like 101, because I think people are not really knowing what's going on. They don't totally understand what race means. They don't know what racism, the academic version versus bigotry. I feel like people do not know what is going on. And so I would like Dr. Diggs, my esteemed colleague, to just drop a kind of a quick Racism 101 course on us. Can you do it, Dr. Diggs?
I don't know. What do you want me to include in it? I can, yes. What do you want
Number
me to
1,
cover?
Race.
Wow. So,
define race in 7 seconds.
Yeah, that's all the time you got, Dr. Diggs. That's all the time you got.
So what I will say is that race has long been thought to be rooted in biology, and that we have biological differences, that the human species could be divided into either subspecies or different species. And we know now through biology and genetics that that's never really been true. There's actually one human race, and that's Homo sapiens, and that our differences are just within that general human race. Now, once we understand that, what we say in academia, but I think we can apply this more generally, is that race, as we understand it, especially as created in the West, and when I say the West, I'm talking about Western countries, not just America, Europe, and so forth, is that race is socially constructed, that they don't really have a biological basis. A lot of times what we think of as race and how we are classified as race is based on how people appear. So sometimes it's color, sometimes it's the, body type, sometimes it's the circumference of the head, all kinds of things that we have constructed in our minds that puts us into races. And we know that those things are not really, really correct, because even in America, if we start looking at the census, where people started walking around and classifying people by race, racial categories have changed over time. They've never even been static. So there is a race. It's the human race. Everything else is stuff that we made up.
Okay. So if that's true, then what is a definition of racism?
So there are a couple of definitions of racism. I think the common definition of racism that you can find in most dictionaries is basically this. It is when people of one quote-unquote racial group feels that their group is superior to other quote-unquote racial groups. So that's the sort of generic, popular, official definition that you can find in the dictionary. The more academic version of racism is this notion that racism equals prejudice plus power. Okay, and that notion is that not everyone, all people can be prejudiced. All people can express bigotry, which is very similar to racism. But in order to be racist or to practice racism, you have to have the institutional support, the systemic support of the society's institutions. You are a member of a dominant culture that systemically subordinates other people, other groups, other cultures. So it's not, so you can be bigoted, for example, and everyone can be equally bigoted. But it's difficult for an African American's bigotry against Muslims or against white people or against Asians to be backed up by the courts, by the schools, by the institutions. If I say or do something or have feelings or discriminate, that's not going to be backed up by society. So that's a lot. I kind of did a long winding thing, but coming back to it,
pretty standard.
It's the notion that it can be bad thoughts, bad behavior, very, very similar to racism, but you really have to be backed by the institutionalized power in order for it to count as racist or racism.
Can I jump in then and ask a follow-up based on something Rebecca was speaking
You're
about
allowed.
Just before we started off mic? There's this issue that just went down in the World Series between, and I'm going to butcher these names because I have not been watching baseball this year and I don't actually know how these are said, Yuli Gurriel and Yu Darvish. And Yu Darvish is a...
Those names just sound real ethnic. And I feel like we're about to talk about racism.
That is to the point. That's what I'm looking to ask. So this was a very big headline. This was Yu Darvish is, I believe, he's half Iranian and then half some sort of East Asian, and I will look it up when you guys are talking. And so Yuli Gurriel hit a home run off him, and when he got back to the dugout, was kind of talking trash with the other guys in the dugout, and he made, for lack of a better term, the chinky eyes, the stereotypical
like
thing
Chinese,
that people do. Exactly.
yeah.
And he did that, and he was laughing. And this player is known to have, as many players do, he's played in the Japanese leagues during the off season. He's lived in Asia. He's spent time there. And so I guess my question is, something like that becomes really big in the headlines. I guess there was a sort of semi-apology, if you want to say. I guess there was a very public hat tip done on the field that was supposed to even everything out and make everything okay. Yu Darvish, for his part, was extremely magnanimous and sort of just kind of treated it as a teachable moment and didn't really rip the guy apart as he probably could have in the climate that we're in. But I guess my question is, what happens when you're talking about something that is sort of lateral on the privilege?
I like to call it brown on brown takedown.
Brown on brown takedown. I like that. And I think that's where you use the terms that that were components of our racism definition, and that is, I would talk about that kind of incident as either expressions of prejudice and or expressions of bigotry. And we do that laterally quite frequently. And then, once you think it's an expression of dominant culture over subordinated cultures, that's when it ratchets up to racism. That's a very technical way of thinking about it that not everyone knows and not everyone who knows agrees with. And so I think in conversation, those are the negotiations we have to have. Because you can't just go to the dictionary and you can't just get a ruling from the coach or the referee. We have to talk about all of that, and that's why we're here. That's why we do that. So there's not any absolute right or wrong. All that stuff has to be talked about and negotiated, and it may be different on a different day with different people in different circumstances.
Yeah, I think that is something that I think we've talked about this a little bit before, but this idea of really needing to have answers. And I want to be very clear that I have some answers that work for me, but maybe they are not going to work for other people. And I think that is the heart of being able to have these kind of conversations, is being willing to just engage in it, talk about it, and kind of see where it takes you. And some things, I guess sometimes it'll be.
And it's a fascinating thing to me because, and this will weave in and out of, this will be thematic for all of our conversations that we have. Part of the reason why I think it's good that we together are having these conversations is because a lot of times when we have the conversations in mixed company, it's assumed that the white middle class discourse and ways of being and ways of knowing is the way we're going to talk about it, and everybody knows and everybody agrees with it. Well, that's kind of problematic. For example, something that people do all the time, I'm going to see if I can this is spontaneous, but the use of the dictionary. So I've had Caucasian people arguing with Native American people about the definition of the term squaw and whether it is offensive or not. And then white mainstream people will say, well, we'll settle this right now. We'll go look it up in the dictionary. And they're saying this to Native Americans who, if they're culturally Native American, they might be a little more familiar with the actual meaning of the term squaw than what's in the dictionary. That's really a collection of common use of terms and phrases by white folks.
Sure. Wait, stand by. Hold on a second. What is the real meaning of squaw?
Now, see, I would have to go back. I used to know, but for this conversation, the discord was about whether or not, whatever the meaning of the word squaw is whether it is what's the word I'm looking for? Whether it is derogatory or not. So let's not use the word squaw, let's use the term redskin. Same thing.
Yeah.
And people will look it up in the dictionary, and if it doesn't say in the dictionary, this is a derogatory term, Main Street people are like,
yeah. Then I'm like, who wrote the dictionary?
That's right.
So that's the same thing with this idea of the definition of racism.
That's right.
Of being, it's just thinking like you're racist superior to the other race, but like who wrote that?
That's right.
To even have a critical eye. Damn, we need a critical eye even for the dictionary.
We do, because we take for granted that the dictionary is the final say of what words mean.
Speaking of what words mean, you hear about that guy that asked for the lawyer?
Yes, I did see that.
Did you hear about that, James?
No.
So, black guy was like, nah, man, give me a lawyer, dog. And they said he didn't ask for a lawyer.
He asked for a lawyer dog.
A lawyer dog. And he's like in jail.
Without representation, even though he invoked his rights.
And I'm assuming we know about this because it's gone to some circuit court at this point. I have a.
It's just one of those stories that just made the news like yesterday, today, something like that. And but again, it's like I want my lawyer, dog. Like, I'm pretty sure we all know what that means. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty sure the people listening to that knew what it meant.
Yeah. Well, that's not some really out there slang, is it? I'm sure half the cops on the force are calling each other dog on a daily basis. So, yeah. By the way, based on my very shallow Googling, I found that squaw is from a specifically Algonquin word for a woman, but because it became sort of universally applied to First Nations women and across nations and things like that, it's considered to be a slur. Wikipedia defines it as a slur exclusively, does not identify it as a word in use.
All right. Little House on the Prairie is out. It's out of the rotation. Can't watch that anymore. Because they're always talking.
So we do, and you know what? And that's also a good point, both the Wikipedia and Little House on the Prairie, because what it symbolizes to me is that we make progress over time. And part of the reason why we do make progress over time is because we have these conversations.
Yeah.
You know, and we create new understandings based on including, you know, other people's perspectives. So I'm old enough to know, well, we all know, but I'm old enough to remember much less inclusion, you know, in text and dictionaries than we even have today. We still have a long way to go, but it was hard to even talk or have an argument about it because everything was taken for granted as whatever the way the white mainstream is using it is in fact right.
Well, and then how far do you think we've really come, I guess is my question, because I know you're like so old, Dr. Diggs.
Yeah, really old. Ancient.
You're seasoned. I mean, just what can you give like a quick assessment, like 1 to 10 me, on where you think we are at from the time you were, I don't know, let's say 10 years old to now. What do you think?
Well, let's not do two. Let's do 2 years old to now.
Oof. Right.
And because I'm going to introduce some stuff that I wasn't aware of, but just to answer your question, and I'm going to say 7.5. I think we're a long way because when I was born, there was still Jim Crow, and there were still water fountains and bathrooms that were for coloreds only.
I don't want to interrupt you, but could you maybe speak about where you were born?
Yeah, so I was born in Washington, D.C. in 1962. And another way to even say that is my parents met there and got married, and then I was born. Both of my parents are the first ones in their family to be able to vote. And the only reason why they were able to vote is because people of color could vote in Washington, D.C. People did not have the right to vote all over the country, but you did in Washington, D.C. But I happen to know, I don't remember separate swimming pools. I don't remember the signs because those things started to change. By the time I have memories of things, you know, I was 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. But I also happen to know that I don't remember seeing those things, but I know that's how my parents grew up, and they even have feelings about that. They've been very amazed that they fought for integration and they got to see us as kids live that. But again, when I was born, so 1965, you know, I'm 3 years old. So that's why I started there, because when I'm 10, black people have the right to vote. You know, they have the so-called right to fair housing, so-called, you know. But before then, we didn't even have that. So things had changed. So then during my time in the 70s, I'm like the second wave of school integration. So I'm in the suburbs of D.C. now and going to majority white schools. But there are a lot of black people there. There are a lot of Latinos. There are a lot of people of color. And we're all middle class and well-to-do. So there was progress made from, if we go ahead and say 1950s as zero, which it wasn't, but just for argument's sake, 1950s as zero, I think in my lifetime there's been movement. And you know, between the time I'm now a toddler and elementary school, junior high school. So I'll just say it like this. So when I grew up, integrated, there was a lot of work by everybody, especially in schools, to try to get along and to squash any notion of racial discord. I mean, people worked really, really hard. Then when we got to middle school, it was the same thing. But all of a sudden we had dances. And all of a sudden now black kids and white kids are going to be dancing together. And parents on both sides, or on all sides, or on many sides, they weren't sure they were signing up for that. And so, but as kids, we were able to, we had issues with that too, but we were able to negotiate that. So now we're moving, in my view, to answer your question, now we're moving from 3 to 4 to 5. So I think making progress. This is just based on my experience. And then, you know, I got married and I married a white woman. During my parents' day, that was not going to be happening. And even in my day, let's say I got married in 1991, there was struggle involved in that. But it wasn't like you were in trouble or something was going to happen to you, you know, if you did that. People were able to do that, and we did that. And so now we're moving even further. So I think from my perspective, if you do a scale of 1 to 10 in my lifetime, I think we've made a lot of progress. So I would give it like a 7, I guess, with the caveat that last 3, that's still a long way to go. There's still a lot that needs to be done. So I think we've come a long way. We do things today. I mean, even how we're doing now, that wouldn't have happened as much as it does now. It wouldn't have been as possible, you know, 20 years ago. So that's a long answer, but...
Well, I expect nothing less from you, Dr.
Right.
Diggs.
Well, so the question of progress, though, is interesting because I'm thinking a little bit about the survey, Rebecca, that you had sent out to us to talk about.
Washington Post.
Yeah, the survey about are things getting better. And what the theme of the survey you said was that white millennials think a lot more like whites than millennials is basically which is, I mean, this is a big thing, you know, not to devolve it into a whole Trump conversation, and we shouldn't, but the big conversation about Trump that I most often have with people, because who I generally speak to are liberals and leftists. And so there's always this sort of post-mortem about why did we lose? And, you know, there's, of course, infighting between Hillary people and Bernie people and that sort of thing. But in my opinion, the myth of the economically anxious coal miner or whatever in Pennsylvania is very pervasive and remains very pervasive. And there continues to be an idea that, if we had just like sucked up to this one class of like old unemployed white people a little more, like we could have won. And that becomes the conversation rather than, hey, the majority of the country is urban and is very close to becoming people of color. And maybe you should rally the people who already like you rather than sucking up to this contingency of, you know, 300,000 voters that lost you in a couple of counties. And so the reason I say that is because the notion of white millennials are more like white people than they are like millennials. Donald Trump won white people across the board in every single economic, education category, etc. All the mythology about why Donald Trump won, the answer is that Donald Trump won the white vote. That's the answer.
Yeah.
And so I think that the poll that you were talking about is really interesting because it reflects that. It reflects how in some ways progress as an ideology is sort of a fantasy because it says that things always get better.
Well,
but they don't. They get better when you work for them.
Wow.
They don't get better because that's the way that like the famous Martin Luther King quote, the moral arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice. It's a great quote. But the bad side of it is it does make it sound like justice is a natural force.
Right. That's right.
And it isn't. I don't think it. Maybe
it's not. No,
maybe Dr. King. Dr. King was a Christian. I'm not. Maybe he believed that justice was a force at work. I don't believe that it is. I believe that justice wins when people work for it. I don't think that it's a given.
Okay. Yeah. What do you think, Rebecca?
That was a bit of a soliloquy. I'm sorry, but I was trying to get to.
I'm like, my mind is blown. I'm like, James quoting Dr. King.
Well, no, well, that's.
Pardon.
So, what do you think?
Well, I don't have a particularly well-formed opinion on it. I had an emotional reaction to it, the way I feel like I often do when I see something. I don't always have it. When I saw this, though. That when the question was, okay, you had to agree or disagree. White nationalist groups are not very different from groups that comprise the Black Lives Matter movement. Okay? And 51% of the whites surveyed agreed with that.
And these are all millennials? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that kind of like blew my mind a little bit because I was like, damn. And I'm like, Black Lives Matter, it's just, come on. I'm still so frustrated with that. And people are still saying all lives matter like it's a real thing. Like they haven't even realized that what they're doing is really offensive.
Well, yeah. And we don't know each other. I think we don't take the time to know each other. I mean, I would wonder... if I see that, I would actually wonder, what do millennials know about Black Lives Matter?
What do they know about white nationalism also?
And what do they know about white nationalism? And just, I'd like to dig deeper in that.
Wow.
And I think that pulling what all of you are saying, but both of you are saying, I think it's those things. And there's so much more. Once we have stuff established, we tend to think our established views of things, of how things are supposed to go and how people are going to react are the way things are. And we miss these shifts, even among millennials. So here's some other stuff. This is not instead of what you all have said. Here's some other stuff that's going on. Once upon a time, Black folks would universally support the Democratic Party and the candidate. But one of the things that's hidden is that a lot of Black millennials were Bernie people. They were not Hillary people.
You're looking at a 0.5 Black Bernie supporter up in here now.
That's right. And so that's a thing. Another thing, I think the Clinton campaign took for granted that young women we're going to go for the first female candidate. And young female millennials, not just white young female millennials, were not impressed by Hillary Clinton. They're like, hell no. And so, but we took for granted that everybody was going to come back in and everybody was going to, and it doesn't work that way because we don't know our millennials. We think young people are just going to come along. And they're saying, oh, no. Not to mention, don't even talk about the fact that you're talking about Bernie Sanders. How old is he? 68? Ooh. Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton. And young people are supposed to, just get with that? So there are many, many dynamics going on. And when we base our campaigns and when we base our expectations on 1970s models of politics, I think we're missing something. In fact, that's what Barack Obama was all about. He didn't wait his turn. If he would have waited his turn, he'd just be running now. Okay? He skipped and he said, we're going to do a 21st century campaign. And then we went right back to 20th century.
Right.
Or what are you talking about? This is like some 18th century.
Well, yeah, we went back even further than we did.
17th, 16th.
I mean, do you think that Obama's, the fact that most people had no idea who he was when he first arrived on the scene, almost helped in that sort of fashion? Because I agree with you. I was very surprised, actually, at the time at how little the fact that Hillary Clinton was a woman seemed to matter to almost anybody. And of course, there's everything to do with Hillary Clinton, and any woman in the public eye is tied up in all kinds of subtle sexism in the culture, and sometimes not so subtle. But the thing about Clinton is she's been around so long, and she has so much baggage, and people know who she is. She was Hillary first, and I think maybe a woman second in a lot of people's minds, and clearly in a lot of women voters' minds.
Yes.
Whereas I think, if Obama came in with a 25-year career, that's why the first black president couldn't have been Jesse Jackson.
Right. No way.
Because there's 20 years of him on television making enemies, whereas Obama's kind of freshness, I think, helped him with that.
But he didn't play the game. He played the game differently. And I think that's a point that's missed, because what we did was, well, I think Rebecca, even by your reaction, said it stronger than me, because I was saying we had this taste of the 21st century, then we went backwards. And I was thinking in my mind, we went backwards to the 20th century. But your point is actually more astute, because we went even further back.
Hello, we're trying to go back to Civil War, John Kelly.
But framing it that way, again, I think plays into the ideology of progress, because that plays into the idea, we're always moving forward. Can you believe we move back? What if this is the future?
Ooh, see,
I've never that's the thing that people don't consider, is that maybe the future sucks. Like, if people never...
I feel like anyone who has seen The Handmaid's Tale knows what's coming.
That's true. Yeah, there's enough dystopian ideas.
Or have you guys read the book California?
No.
I'm obsessed with it, okay? You need to, if anyone is listening to this, you need to go ahead and buy that book. It's by Edan Lepucki. It's called California, and everyone should read it.
Okay.
Because it is legit.
Can I bring up, because you mentioned Bernie and you've kind of talked about the schism in the Democratic Party, I don't know if you saw that there's been a lot of conversation around something that Bernie just said on, I believe, on Seth Meyers. And it's something that he said a lot on the campaign trail, but I think he put it in a way that was more explicit and more lending itself to being arranged as a cohesive pull quote that really kind of showed people the divide to deal with Bernie. Are you familiar with this story?
No.
Okay, so he said, I think we've got to work in two ways. Number one, we have got to take on Trump's attacks against the environment, against women, against Latinos and blacks and people in the gay community. We've got to fight back every day on those issues. But equally important, or more important, we've got to focus on bread and butter issues that mean so much to ordinary Americans.
Ordinary
What the
Americans.
hell?
Well, there you go.
Bernie, I'm sorry I voted for you in the primary. Now I'm sorry.
But that is the big schism, and that's the big schism with people who have an essentially sort of Marxist view of history, that ultimately if we fix the economy, we fix everything else. That not all racism is tied in with class, which is a huge ideology of white people across the political spectrum.
Well, and it's further than that. It is that. It is exactly that. And going back to how we started about race and racism, it is also this notion that white is ordinary.
Right. Like, gay issues matter, but let's also talk about what matters to ordinary Americans. Black issues matter, but and to that degree, ordinary can mean absolutely nothing but white. That's the only thing that it can mean in that context. He named everybody that wasn't straight white people.
Yeah.
No, he mentioned everybody that wasn't straight white men.
See?
He mentioned women as well.
Right.
Yeah. As part of the non-ordinary side.
Should I just give up? Should we just be white supremacists? Like, what should we do? I need guidance.
I think we're doing it. I think our parents did it. I think our grandparents did it. I forgot which one of you asked, but we just talked about, what does progress mean? And you asked me, where are we? Well, I think progress is a funny word to define. I think we've made some progress.
Okay, so that is the only thing. I'm going back to this stupid survey, which, I mean, data, statistics, and this and that. But this was the other one that made me be like, I felt sad, okay, when I read this. This is the quote. Ready? Irish, Italian, Jewish, and many other minorities overcame prejudice and worked their way up. Blacks should do the same without any special favors. Mm-hmm. Okay? And then I'm going to read all of the groups that said, okay? So who agree with that? 40% of African Americans agreed with that. Mm-hmm. Okay? 44% of Asians agreed with it. Mm-hmm. 51 of the Latinos, and whites 59. Mm-hmm. Which is the same as 60. Mm-hmm. So I feel like I'm so tired of people being like, oh, you just need to pull yourselves up by the bootstraps without taking into consideration really what the legacy of slavery is. And, people have this idea of telling you to just get over it, or this happened, it was just, 250 years ago or whatever.
Right. Well, people love...
Or less. Damn. Sorry. It's less than that.
Right. Well, people love to point out, that there's... there were signs that said Irish need not apply, et cetera. And of course there were the notion of white people, just like the notion of Christians, is a pretty modern invention. There used to be a whole lot of in-groups slaughtering the hell out of each other based on minor differences. And then at a certain point they coalesced around white Christians because they realized that gave them better coin, basically as a collective. But what they don't mention is, we also don't have, postcards of smiling crowds, lynching Irishmen. That's not a thing. Right. So it's not a great comparison. Yeah. Generally. And
I think it illustrates that progress is a double-edged sword, right? I mean, if I were putting an academic hat on, and I don't like what I'm about to say, but it could be argued just as a exercise that if you have 40% of African Americans stating that, you would not have had that, 30 years ago. And in one way, that could be construed as progress. All right. The inconvenient truth that runs parallel to that, though, and this is another reason why I think we talk, is that for people of color and difference, people are still losing their lives. Mm-hmm. It's a serious thing, and if you think about progress in those terms, you have to wonder, have we really made progress? I mean, we're still desegregated. I mean, we're still segregated in our schools. We're still segregated in our churches. As segregated as we were, in the 1950s. And that's after rights and integration. So, I guess what I would say about that, I haven't really thought about it. But again, it's all about how do we think about the terms that we actually use. And then this other thing about we think our terms have like one static meaning, and I think they hold multiple spaces at the same time. So if I were to answer your question again, I still stick with I go from 0 to 7 but on the other hand, if I look at it another way, I might say we're at 3 because as we've moved forward, we've also moved back. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's not one or the other.
So something that you said kind of just sparked this thought of, the terms that we're using and that they take on different meaning and stuff. I think that sometimes when people get really bogged down with this idea of, white privilege or white guilt or white fragility, and they get really maybe upset or they don't understand what that means. And I can't believe, honestly, that people still don't know what white privilege means and that they still are saying, well, I grew up in a shack. Oh, damn it, I'm doing that accent again. I'm going to keep going. I grew up in a shack, so how do I have any privilege?
Mm-hmm. I worked hard for what I have, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I just think, like, when we're talking about these things, how I don't want to be like, how can we dumb it down? Or how can we, do you know what I'm saying?
Well, no, I think that's reasonable. And that's something Rebecca and I were talking about, is that there have been a number of occasions just in this half hour we've been talking where people have the word academic's been used a bunch.
Sorry.
No, it's not a bad thing. I think
you're an academic, bro.
And Rebecca used it as well. It's I think it's pertinent to some of the stuff that we're talking about. And there's a lot of, it depends. We have to negotiate XYZ. We have to unpack XYZ. There are certain things that really jump out at me as the language of cultural studies and gender studies classes that I took in school that I'm glad that I took. But what I wonder about is there, how did I put it to you, Rebecca, earlier? Is there, sometimes I have a concern that social justice is becoming a purview of educated people with with a lexicon and with a set of understood definitions that the rest of the world is just not invited in on. Two academic intersectional feminists can have a conversation about 10 women of color who work for Walmart, none of whom have any idea what intersectional feminism is.
Right.
And so are you reaching a point where the conversation is not useful to the vast majority of the population? That would be the other side of that, would be to say, holy shit, I can't believe these people don't know what white privilege is. But on the other hand, it's like, maybe a lot of people don't. Clearly 40% of African-American millennials don't know. So has the conversation gone to a place that it's only useful to a small number of people who can kind of share the same lexicon?
I mean, my initial answer, if people could see my face, they'd see me, I'm like, damn, that is so true. Like, you are dropping truth, Dr. J.
That's what I do.
But yeah,
I'm not a doctor. Dr. Diggs is the only doctor here. I do not want there to be any misunderstanding.
Well, I think it just reveals the complexity, and I think we've got to do it all. And I keep bringing it back to, that's why we have to have the conversations, because I don't think that the real trouble is the language per se. It is the language. But I think a bigger part of that is we're using different language in different bubbles. And when we're not talking to each other, so a bunch of academics or educated or college educated, we pick up the jargon and the language because we're having that shared experience, that shared frame of reference. But a lot of people who we are talking to in the community may or may not have that. And it's not about this set of language is more right than the other set of language. It's just we don't talk to each other. Mm-hmm. So I got a story. This is how I grew up. I got a story. So I grew up in D.C., East Coast, upper middle class. And I spoke what we call, like how I do now, proper English, okay? But as soon as school was out in May, I spent the summer in rural South Carolina or rural Tennessee. And I can remember being 4 and 5 years old and being with all of my cousins in the country and trying to correct their English. Mm-hmm. Okay? This is how you say it. Mm-hmm. And that didn't last. No. And nobody was mad. But that's just not the way it is, right? And so I had to be able to finally get that. And so when I go home to the country, I speak country like everybody else. And I still speak country with a East Coast accent, so I get teased and stuff. But that's part of what I'm talking. It's not that the language is wrong. Mm-hmm. It's just that who gets to decide what the right language is. Mm-hmm. And so I've been able to grow up, just socialize that, well, sometimes it's right and sometimes it's wrong. But I say it to say that's why the conversations are important. Because what happens is we have these separate cultural frames of reference in our bubbles. When we create a new bubble that's still rooted in our separate bubbles, when we create a new, but now we create a new shared experience and we blend the language, but that takes time and we have to negotiate it. And it's out of that we have new understandings that actually can be inclusive, you know, and it can be on anything. I'm raised Christian Methodist Episcopal, but I've been to synagogue, you know, and I don't have to leave my tradition, but I actually can navigate some other people's traditions and understand where they're coming from and not say, well, your way is wrong. What's wrong with you? You know? And so that's what we spend time doing is if I'm an academic, I'm going to use my academic language and you're going to have to deal with that. But I also have to deal with whatever your language and references. Then we create a new reference and a shared reference.
So I felt like, I felt like I was in church for a minute there. But this is what I'm struggling with, and I don't even know if anyone can help me. But I still have this feeling of, no, I'm right. Or as I like to say, I'm not always right, but I'm never wrong. And I cannot let go of this idea that women are people and that we should be paid the same as a man for the same job. That's crazy. I think every single person living in this country should have the same rights. I think that, you know, I don't think gay people are going to hell because they're gay. I don't think there's anything wrong if you want to be, if you're transgender. I don't see how those things affect my life. And if people want to be a crazy, like, right-wing, gun-nut country person or something, like, if they're not hurting me, like, that's okay. If you know, like, your Westboro Baptist Church, if you want to stand on the corner and be like, oh, God hates fags, well, that's terrible, but I'm not gonna, you know what I mean, though? Yeah, like, I just don't understand why they want to, like, legislate us, or, you know, especially as a woman, and I feel like I feel like I can't give an inch, and that's how I'm feeling.
Yeah.
Somebody help me.
Well, and Dr. Diggs said earlier about trying to go into a place of asking questions rather than answering, which is, that's the hardest thing for anybody to do. That's that's incredible to sit across from somebody who A, disagrees with you, but B, their disagreement may be possibly a direct debasement of you and who you are, and to decide that your response is going to be to learn something about them in order to respond is not to, you know, I know we spend a lot of time flattering Dr. Diggs when we sit here, but that's a tremendously noble way to move through life that very, very few of us are really capable of doing.
And there is that. I also think you have to pick your style and battles, and different issues and different battles mean different tactics. For example, I hear exactly what you're saying. And there's a sort of one way to negotiate, but I'm just going to make this up. But what if you took, given the spirit of your comments, and given the spirit of women's rights in this country, I could argue that one tact that women should take is not even a fight for equality. Women should say, motherfucker, I'm superior.
I say it every day to my husband.
I should be getting paid more. I should be getting paid more. You know, number one, to put up a mirror, you know, to patriarchy. But also, even if you think about it as negotiating, if your goal is equal rights, where you have nowhere to negotiate from but down. So you might have to say, hey, we need to be getting paid more. We need reparations for the pay that we didn't get.
Yeah.
And you might have to make a strong, affirming case just to shake things up, the way we think about things up, for people to actually say, Because then you want people to say, I don't know why you think you're better than me. We're equal. And then you'd be like, Because here's how it happens. Then when men think it's their idea, we all proud of that. See what we came up with?
Oh, I get it. So you came in asking for, you know, the other guy's got $50. You came in asking for the whole 100. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, no, we're even, so I'll give you 50. And then you say, well, okay. And he feels like he won the negotiation.
I think we got a winning tactic here. Someone write that down.
That is good.
And there's not one right way. I mean, and you might choose to battle differently in a similar but different circumstance. But I do think it is okay. I mean, yeah, because I'll say it like this, because part of the problem, the difficulty of having these conversations is we assume the shared values of equality, even that everyone's opinion is equal. So that's a nice goal and value, but it's not always true. So for example, I'm going to do it two ways. Women who have given birth, okay, they may have an opinion about childbirth, but they have an additional experience with childbirth that not everyone shares. So I can be Dr. such and such as a man, and I can read about childbirth, but I don't even have a frame of reference. And I can have an opinion, but are our opinions equal? I'm not sure that they are.
Well, that comes back to exactly what you said. You, in that case, are the person looking up squaw in the dictionary, and the woman who's given birth is the actual Native American person who can sit here and talk to you about what they've lived through.
And then if I'm like, well, it's not in the book, so you might have to come up, you have to say, fuck the book.
Don't say that to a librarian, but... I know.
It's rhetorical, though, right?
I know.
It's rhetorical, and sometimes you have to, flip it on folks because they don't see until it gets flipped. Then they all offended. Well, it's like, duh.
Yeah.
You get it now?
I like that. Speaking of being offended, I want to talk about something, and I don't want you to start crying over there, James. Okay?
Oh, please.
I want to talk about...
If I start crying, just please know I just have my own things going on today.
I want to talk about white fragility.
All right.
Okay? I want to talk about that because I feel like that is something in the conversations that I have led around race in a public forum, in a private forum, I feel like that is something that is always getting in the way. And, it's as simple as, well, I'm not racist. Why are you saying that to me? And I just feel like they're always, I'm really generalizing, but these are the people that I'm engaging with. I feel like they're always just it's like what I'm saying is just going right over their head. Like they're not even hearing me. Or, when someone tells me, this is like a microaggression, but if someone says, oh, Rebecca, you're so scary. And I'm like, what the fuck is scary about me? What's scary right now? And I don't know what to do with that a lot of the time. I don't know how to deal with this white tears, as we call it. I don't know if people know what white tears are. Have you heard of this term before, James?
I have, yeah, but I do think that it is probably one of those things that's a little bit of a specialized term. I feel like I feel like white people who do know about it are, Twitter and Tumblr using, quote unquote woke lefty people have heard it. I would be very surprised if my dad has ever heard that term anywhere.
Okay. So if your daddy was here, how would you explain white tears to him?
So tears are the salty discharge that come out of people's eyes.
Excellent.
My dad is not very... No, I'm just kidding. My dad is great. In case my dad listens to this. I just use my dad... Basically, when I say my dad, I mean... any 60-year-old white guy on the street. That's really what I mean.
Okay.
Well, I don't know. I could give you my definition of how I understand it, but I'd actually rather hear you say. What would you, if you had to give the tutorial on what are white tears, how would you say that you use that phrase?
Me?
Yeah.
Okay. Ooh, I feel like I'm on the spotlight. I would use that phrase is when white people, when talking about race or systemic racism or anything like that, when they realize things are going a certain way and they begin to cry and they feel an emotional pain associated with having a conversation about race, and they get very upset and they get very offended that because they consider themselves like a good white person, and then they begin to, I don't know, have an emotional reaction.
Sure.
So that's kind of how I think about it. It's just when you're trying to have a conversation about race and then the white person cries, like literally cries.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a good description and definition. And
but I never really thought about it. Thanks, James.
And
like, do you have a different definition?
No, I think that's a good one. I think that's a good one.
I know, but you always have like 7 definitions.
I know. And but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this instead. I think that part of the upset is some of what we've talked about before, is when you take for granted that what is right and normal is white, middle-class norms, experience, and values. When anything happens where people start using language or they start confronting that or challenge, it is upsetting because you're not used to that. And it is a threat to your position. See, some people who are part of the dominant culture, they don't go around every day singing, dee, I'm part of the dominant culture, right? It's just part of how things are, right? But they do get internally when other people are talking about equality or using words differently or shifting the paradigm, that is taking away from their power. And they might not want to share. So it's actually even emotional. It's not always even thoughtful. It's emotional. It's like, if we are equal, that means I'm not dominant. And that's upsetting. And that's upsetting. It's an emotional thing because it's supposed to be that we are dominant. That's take my country back.
Yeah.
Because we want some diversity, but it's supposed to be a white country. And everybody's supposed to like know that and agree to that. And when it's like, oh my goodness, you mean it's not a white country? That's an emotional thing.
Yeah. I think that's also, and this is a place where I am sort of a historical Marxist Bernie Krat sort of thinker, that the entire culture, the entire system is designed to be a zero-sum game. It's designed to be a system where everybody feels like you have to protect your nest, because anything that gets taken away, there's not enough room for all of us to do better. For somebody to do better, somebody else has to be doing worse.
Right. And here's what I would say about that. I think that's right on. I think it's interesting because a lot of our rhetoric is the opposite of that. It's egalitarian. It's merit, egalitarian. If you just work hard and do the right thing, there's enough for everyone. But we actually know better than our rhetoric. And when that stuff starts coming up, and our bubble and the dominant bubble is threatened, people know they got to defend that stuff because it's the zeros. Your gain comes at my expense, and I'm not sure that I'm going to have that. Or if I'm an adult, I might have always been there, but what about my kids?
Is it a place of fear?
It's loss of privilege. It's threat of privilege.
Because
which I agree comes out of fear.
Yeah. Because I guess.
And it's so fearful that even talking about it is a threat.
Yeah.
Much less having programs or structures around actually doing it.
Okay. So what do we do? How can we kind of help people be able to push through that and be able to like realize it or talk about it? I know that's something that we do in our work or we're trying to do. And I guess I'm wondering like what can we do?
Carry Kleenex. We've got to be big enough to cry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We've got to have a real discussion. And I'm using it for tears. It can be anger, whatever emotions we have around these issues and struggles. If we're going to do better, we have to not only be willing to have conversations, but we need to have the tough conversations. And we need to work through our fear, our tears, our anger, and we need to do that together. Because here's the other thing I know. So some people in the dominant culture, everything's organized around the mainstream. They don't necessarily have to interact with other people. And so they don't know. But even as we interact, us people of color and difference, in the mainstream ways, and we smile and wave and be nice, we come home and cry. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We come home and have anger. Mm-hmm. We come home and have fear. Mm-hmm. And then we fear for our kids differently. Mm-hmm. Even though all parents feel for their kids, we have additional fears. Mm-hmm. And so a challenge is we can't afford any longer to just have nice conversations because we might hurt the feelings of white people. So physically and rhetorically, we got to carry Kleenex. Or one of my professors of color college, she said, no, Greg. She says, if you do Kleenex, that's even too good because that means you're thoughtful and considerate. She says, you carry napkins.
Like from Starbucks, that you stole. You just put it in your pocket.
You just grab
some toilet paper.
Too many at the Burger King. Oh, my mom does that. She's got a whole drawer of fast food napkins. My mom has never bought a condiment, and she has never bought a napkin.
Yeah. And so I think we have to stop being so nice, and it's a conflict for me, as you know, because I like to be nice and I like to have facilitating and accommodating talks, and I still think we have to do that. But my frustration is that just supports the status quo, and I'm uncomfortable. So we need to start rescuing white folks and their fears and their discomfort. We can respect it. We can understand it. But it's like, okay, we're here together. Let's work through that. And you can cry, but we're not going to let your tears disrupt this conversation. Because that's the other part about it. What happens is when we have a diverse conversation and then the white dominant person gets upset, now all the conversation is about supporting that person. For the rest of the time, making sure they're okay. And then we didn't have the conversation we're supposed to have. So we also have to find a way to respect people's real emotions and real fears and real tears without letting it get in the way of the work that we actually have to do together.
Can I come off that and try to nudge you towards something that I saw that you posted online this week? I don't know if you're interested in getting into this on air, but I thought it was interesting. You had this analogy, this sort of parable of two little girls, one of whom is a slave. And I don't know. Can you walk me through that and the question that you're asking with that? Because I think it's sort of interesting.
So it's about it wound up being a little more complicated than I thought it would be, but the theme I was trying to invoke is the myth of the innocence of racism, or that you somehow have to have knowledge or intent of racism in order to act in a racist way. So the way I tried to present it is, it's 1840, living on the plantation, a young white girl who is 8 years old is playing, or maybe not even playing, but at present, and discovers that a slave who is 6 can read. And surprised, she runs and tells her mother, this person can read. Her mother doesn't even believe her because you're not supposed to be reading and black people can't read. But because her daughter tells her, she comes and checks it out. And sure enough, this person can read. Now, the daughter doesn't really know the effects of what that report is going to be. We don't know what the intent of the daughter is, but the way I wrote it was, what happened was the young child got sold off to another plantation. The father died from his wounds being punished, whipped and brined, when they saw, and he happened to die. And they let the mother stay on, but admonished her, don't you be involved with having any colored children reading. Now, the little white girl didn't do any of that. But the question is she racist or not? And I'll say something about that. So I introduced it as a thought exercise. I didn't really mean that it had to be one right answer or one wrong answer. But I was trying to just demonstrate that you don't have to be a mean person, or you don't have to be intentional. And maybe white people would say, well, she didn't know, so she wasn't racist. But you talk to some black folks, that's a racist thing that just happened with the aftermath, And I can give other examples that are closer, but I do understand, one of the things that came up in the discussion was, what responsibility do you give to a kid, to a young child? And I didn't want to argue that because I understand that, and I think that's something that we also have to talk about. Yet at the same time, what I can further tell you, because I raised kids, 5-year-old white kids, they're already doing some stuff. My daughter, black, went to a mostly white not kindercare, but daycare the summer before she went to kindergarten. Mostly white kids. The kids are playing. They're in a circle. They're passing toys around, passing a doll around. The way I got the report, my daughter got the doll and played with it and then passed it to the next person. But a little white girl said, no, we can't play with that anymore. It's spoiled because it's been touched by her. So, and that girl had to be 6 or 7 years old. Well, I don't know what to make of that. I mean, in a lot of ways, she doesn't know. I don't know what her intent was. But in my view, that's one of my daughter's first racist experiences. And it was not an adult that did that. It was a little girl.
Yeah.
So.
And there's no denying that it's a racist experience.
No, it was clear.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the little girl actually knew or actually intended.
Right.
But that it's something. It wasn't. It's hard for me to believe that it wasn't innocent or well-meaning. No gesture.
I wonder what's scarier: the idea that kid learned racism at home specifically, or the idea that just through acculturated racism that was enough to impart that notion to her.
Yeah, and it could be all of that. And then the challenge is, so then as a parent, what kind of responses am I supposed to have? And I'm not even, I know how to deal with my own, I can walk myself through whatever my emotions are and then go deal with the school. But the heartbreak is, how do I explain that to my 5-year-old kid? And then here's the thing that I'll interject with that, because I think some people don't understand this. The extra burden is, with all of my heartbreak and all of my emotion and all the work that I'm going to do on myself and with my child and the anger and upset I have, I know when I walk to the school and have this conversation, somehow I have to be nice. Somehow I have to be rational. And I don't know how, I'm going to ask you, and that's the other thing about having these conversations, rational is an expectation.
Mm-hmm.
But white, black, polka dot, I don't know what experience you've had yet, but when you think about harm to your kid,
Of course.
Yeah.
ration is gone.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just talking about kids. So when I come into a training or I come into a conversation about race, people don't see how mad I actually am.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't present that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't present that because I know the work. But it's like it's extra work because I got to go through all this stuff.
Yeah.
And my kids are harmed and they're going to be harmed. And then not only do I need to talk about it, I got to take extra time to be nice to
You have to
folks.
manage the emotions of everyone in the room.
Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to manage my emotions.
Of course.
And then people will get indignant because I'm supposed to manage yours too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's a struggle. And that's just what we do.
Do you think it comes out of an idea of I'm trying to think, because the sort of topic is this, what is the root of this? I'm trying to relate to where I imagine the core of the defensiveness is. And I wonder if it has to do with a sense of hopelessness, if it has to do with if you talk about what people are rather than what they do, which, and I mean, people have different approaches. Michael Eric Dyson in particular is somebody I think of who he's very big on when he is on television in mainstream white media anyway.
Mm-hmm.
He's very, very careful. He almost never uses the word racist to describe a person.
Mm-hmm.
Almost never.
Mm-hmm.
He will get very, very specific about how a particular white person's behavior reinforces racism. And he will use a long formulation like that. Because, and he said this explicitly, in his mind, it's not helpful to enter a conversation by telling someone what they are. It's helpful to point at what they've done. Because I think because if a white person comes to understand racism as Dr. Diggs defines it, they have to come to terms with the very, very strong likelihood that they have no chance of getting out of this life as a non-racist. And so there's very little hope in that, I think. And again, that's the question of whether it's your job to negotiate white people's hope for themselves. But I do think that is maybe what it comes out of.
That stung me. That stung me because I am the kind of person that will be like, you're racist. Like, I will just say that to someone's face. And I did not used to do that in the pre-Trump era, okay? Like, I didn't. I would be the good half negra, I guess. I would do what I was doing. But now I'm like, no, we have to call it out because we have a white supremacist as our president. And so I'm ready to say that. And now I'm thinking about it. I've been thinking about it a lot because I feel like things are a little bit strained in my work and, and I'll say things and people are uncomfortable and I don't care. I'm like, you're going to be uncomfortable. You're going to be uncomfortable because I'm going to call you out. I'm going to call it out. But now I'm thinking, okay, I need to maybe do it that way where I say, well, and I think I'm careful with my friends like that my coworkers are my friends because that did happen where I said, well, this could be perceived as racist because, and that is how I went into it, and she still cried. So, and I felt like all she could hear was me saying, you're a racist, and that isn't even what I was saying. So I still feel like it gets in the way so much. It doesn't matter how we say it. If I want to be explicit, like your example, that this backs up systemic racism or whatever, I feel like it doesn't matter how I say it because they just go to freaking pieces.
Well, that all of what everybody said is right on point. And the way I would frame it is you have to have all the tools in your toolbox. And then you have to pick and choose what you're going to use and apply. Because the way Michael Eric Dyson does it, if you think about the work that we're doing at the library and stuff, when we do it that way, for people who are just beginning to deal with these concepts, it can take 5, 6, 7 years for people to finally have enough information and experience to get it. And so I always have to make a decision of what are we trying to do? And a lot of times, because I do this as part of my work, I'm willing to take all of that time. But if I'm playing an activist role and we're trying to get some stuff done, I don't have time to wait for you. It's like, hey, I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to use the word. I'm going to say, hey, this is racism, and you get with it or don't. I'm not even going to try to, take too much time to convince you, because I don't have time for that. Or if I'm advocating for my kids, I don't have time to wait for the school to do workshops and professional development and take my child is getting harmed in the meantime while everybody's trying to catch up. Mm-hmm. And so I think we have to do all of that stuff and then pick and choose, because I have friends, some who will listen to this podcast. I came to this realization 12 years ago, and I was in a forum, and I just said, you know what, don't have time. So I called this white woman out. And even my friends of color were like, well, why, Dag, that was mean. Why you have to do that? And I'm like, we don't have time for this. Yeah. And that person is now, I've never even met her in person, but we're still in contact. Now she facilitates, she's a white woman, and now she facilitates these discussions because it was a shortcut confrontation. She didn't like what I said. She didn't believe what I said, but she heard it. Mm-hmm. And then she had some subsequent experience and said, oh, maybe I better check this out. And it was actually faster for me to just say, that's racist as hell. You are a racist. Let's not even make it soft. But it depends on what you're trying to do.
I was going to say that in response to you, Rebecca, that just because someone is angry and defensive in the immediate moment does not mean that you haven't imparted something and that they're... I think for humans generally, anger is the easiest emotion to access. It's the easiest when your back is up against the wall. It's the easiest thing. If you just think about arguments with your spouse, if you think about anything, how often do you lash out immediately, and then the next day you're like, oh, I'm an asshole. And that's like the...
Not me, ever. Yeah. I'm practically perfect in every way. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I hear you, and I've experienced it. I've had that experience, where I've been able to open up and have conversations with people because I lost my shit, and I did lose, and I was like, you know what? I can't even have this conversation with you. And if you're not even on board with this, then I'm not gonna keep talking to you.
Yeah.
And I've had people be gone from that. Mm-hmm. And I've had people come back.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. And that's right. There's no perfect answer. But
and so and here's the other thing. Again, we sometimes carry the extra burden of we're not supposed to be emotional. Mm-hmm. So now we're apologizing because we got upset about something we actually should have got upset about.
Yeah.
But then we feel guilty because we violated a norm.
Yeah.
But actually, that's some abnormal stuff we're dealing with.
Yeah.
And so from my psychology side is sometimes you feel what you feel. And that doesn't mean you should always react or lash out from feelings. But you also shouldn't feel so guilty if you're having a real natural response to bullshit that's going on.
Yeah. That's
because if you don't call bullshit.
It's right there.
Yeah. If you don't
you can have a real natural response to the bullshit that's going on.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're normalizing the bullshit.
Yeah.
And then you're feeling guilty about it. They shit on you.
Yeah.
You all messed up from someone else, but then you're talking about, I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. What?
I know. Well, this is like a real conversation that we had like 6 months ago.
I think that's a lesson that some, at least open-minded white people are learning right now in the age of Trump, is to see how good Obama had to be just to be baseline and to still be maligned by half the country.
Yeah.
And you see how little effort, zero effort, Trump is required to expend on being just a fucking normal, fucking decent person, and how that's acceptable.
Right.
Something I've noticed since I've had a kid, the biggest thing that's opened my eyes in terms, when you have a kid, everything opens your eyes because you see everything through their eyes.
Yeah.
And the number one thing that opens my eyes about since I've had a kid is, when we've lived primarily in pretty diverse places. My kid was born in Oakland, and now we live in a pretty diverse section of Denver. And, we would get on the bus, and often there would be a lot of kids on the bus, and my kid would be the only white one. And I'm always astonished by how grown up black kids are. Mm-hmm. But and when I say kids, I mean kids.
I know what you mean.
I mean 4. I mean 5. Mm-hmm. I mean, my kid, gets on the bus dressed like a fairy, wearing a wig, dancing, being a crazy, frolicking kid. Mm-hmm. And the grown up level that you often see with children of color, especially I think black kids, I've noticed like just out in public, is there's this level of basic stoic kind of maturity that a kid, especially a young black boy, seems to learn at a very young age. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I notice more and more, because race aside, Rebecca and I relate to one another in that we're both New Yorkers and we have big mouths and we get in trouble at work and everyone thinks we're
aggressive.
Yeah, we're aggressive. But, certainly is, I notice the degree to which the thing, that you were talking about, that, your child is in school being undeniably victimized in a situation. There's no gray area, and you have to go in there and make amends. And you have to go in there and make sure, you have to do all that emotional labor of making sure that everybody feels good and that nobody's being made to feel like they're a bad person. And we're just going to talk about, and that's something that struck me through the eyes of having a kid, is the amount of labor that, and and I see it on a different level with my kid being a girl and seeing how girls and women are required to kind of do that labor more than men are in certain situations and that sort of thing. That really strikes me.
And we've had progress and we've gone back. So I think of my parents. Behavior is a big thing, and they were raised a certain way because if you misbehaved out in public as a black child, you might die. Mm-hmm. It was a life, the control was a life and death situation. Mm-hmm. Now in the 70s and the 80s, that kind of relaxed a little bit. People have the conversations, but even African American children were, more and more, unregulated, less and less regulated in that way. But now we've come back because people are dying. And so it's this weird thing. And I didn't make this concept up. I need to look it up and make the reference because there was a PhD student who actually studied this. And I sat in their session and she tracked it. She said the conversations used to be about life and death, then about just behaving. And now the conversations are back to life and death. You better behave on pain of death. That's hard.
Is that because of any change in the real world, or is that because of a change in the way we talk about and report stuff?
I think it's all of those things. I think it's all of those things. I do think it's a little bit overinflated, but when you're talking about life and death, there's no such thing as overinflated.
Of course.
Because this is your child.
You're not rolling the dice with your kid.
This is your family.
Yeah.
You're going to make sure. Mm-hmm. And you live in constant fear that today's the day. And then you go to work and you have to be nice.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then for someone like me who's very light-skinned and, look the way I look, but I have that fear for all of my loved ones, my family, my brother, my dad. Like, one of my cousins is, he's dead and he was killed by the police. Mm-hmm. And it's like you're carrying that with you all the time. And this is a bummer, you guys. Feeling pretty sad right now.
Well, so I'm not going to rescue you from your sadness.
Okay, but can you pass me that booze?
Because sadness is real. What I do, what helps me, because I get sad and mad too, and I just roll with that. The thing is, I also think, as bad as things are and with the extra stuff, there are lots of great, cool stuff too.
Sure.
You know, and great, cool stuff that was not happening 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, it wasn't your Halloween party, although I don't think I made it to your Halloween party last year. But there was something else that you did. I think it was Kingston's birthday. What a beautiful thing, because I watch people, all kinds of different kinds of parents, people of color, people of difference, this kind of thing. And then the little kids, some can hardly walk, others can. All that interaction, that stuff did not happen 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And these little kids, your son is like 2 years old. It's just, he's going to grow up taking that for granted, which was not possible when I was a toddler.
I hope so. I hope that's true. But I think something, because I think my generation, because I've heard it said, it's and we now know it statistically to be true. But my generation, I was born in 1983, and even people a little older than me, I think had that similar situation of that sort of dream diversity, that, United Colors of Benetton kind of diversity. And that was, and that was built into our preschools and our kindergartens and our elementary schools.
You look like a Benetton ad.
Yeah.
That was like a regular thing. Sorry.
Yeah,
I remember.
But then you get to the lunchroom in 9th grade.
And all the black kids
everybody's in a
together.
different table.
Yeah.
And everybody's separate. And I remember I grew up in a family with, my mom was very young when she had me. Her mom was very young when she had her. So I have uncles who are a mere 3 years older than me or whatever. And I remember I had an uncle. So my family on my mother's side is mixed race. My mother's white, but her mom had a second marriage with an immigrant from Ecuador, and so 7 of her 10 siblings are half Ecuadorian, and so my uncle Jerry, who is white, who's a product of the first marriage, still felt that he grew up in a very Latino circle and felt related to Latinos, and often told the story about how heartbreaking it was for him to get in high school and realize you're one of the white kids and you're going to hang out with the white kids and that's what your social circle is going to be. And that wasn't something that either side dictated to him.
Right.
It was just something that happened. And it's funny, I've done, just did training for prison volunteering, and they talked about how, when a riot breaks out, when trouble breaks out, whatever, people divide up along racial lines. So you kidding me? People divide up along racial lines everywhere all the time. Yeah. That's like everywhere you go. And the high school cafeteria is one of the first places you see it. And so I hope that Kingston, who's Rebecca's daughter, and Azalea, the son, and Azalea, who's my daughter, I hope that their generation is the first one where we can somehow make that stick past age 10 or whatever. But that has been a dream that we've pursued in certain ways, and that has kind of dissipated and fallen apart, or at least not lived up to what we hoped it would be.
Sure.
As time has gone on.
And my kids, my youngest is 18 now, but that was a struggle. They had to navigate that, because it's one thing if you are unambiguously belonging to a group. But if you belong to more than one group, and each group, and it can be 2 groups, it can be 3, it can actually be 5. And each one is looking at you, making you declare who you ride with. That's even more complicated. More complicated. Or I've been trying to raise some awareness with some of the people I've been working with in these groups, because we always have the struggle. If I say something a little colorful, it pushes away some people, and we're wanting to be more inclusive. And so I understand that. A challenge I wanted to make them aware of, and I recently did, it's like, listen, it's an interesting thing because these are white groups that I'm hanging out with. And I'm talking in white ways and I'm helping white people. But I'm black. And so when my people of color see me doing this, they're like, Greg, number one, why are you acting like this is new? We told you when you moved to that area, this is who they are and what you do. Why are you acting like you didn't know? That's number one. And number two, why are you so nice to them? You know? And it's okay because I navigate that. But I was telling the group, I was saying, you know, so here's the thing. As we're building allies, and I'm trying to network and connect groups, I can't always be the nice whites only guy because when we're in the mixed setting, I have to still be the same person that I am. Because if either place catches me being black or white or different than who I am, then it all becomes a thing of, oh, he's just acting, you know, kind of thing. So I'm like, in order for me to be real, I understand where people are coming, but I'm going to add some stuff so that you're not surprised when I'm getting down in this other setting in a different, because I'm like, I'm for real, and it'll hurt your feelings. And it's funny because I'm like, because I tell them all this stuff about how people are fragile, and they just start, they're like, you? They mad at, they're offended by you? Man, that's kind of crazy because the real talk is way harder, way harder. And so I say that to say that navigating across race and culture is very interesting because the way I did it, I didn't even go to the cafeteria. I played since 7th grade. I didn't even eat. I went outside, played with the black folks, basketball all day. I was all black everything at lunchtime. But if I did go in the cafeteria, I'd sit with the white folks, you know. But my lunchtime identity was established black. And there was no, but I had to work and pay attention. I had to keep track of how I was presenting and who I was hanging with and how's it going to look if I hang with the white people and how's it going to look if I hang with the black people and, you know.
Don't get me started on that.
You know, and I'm black, right? Much more complicated if you got more stuff going on.
That's a conversation for another day.
And I'm going to say it is, but it should be for many days because part of the challenges that we've had over many years now is our race relation conversations have been negotiated around black and white. And there's so much more going on. And we need to be having those conversations because black folks are a trip too.
Oh, you don't have to tell me.
Right? You know, I was writing something today. It's amazing to me. And this goes way back.
I couldn't say, I was waiting for a break in the conversation and I'll cut it.
And I mean, this goes back to like women's suffrage, right? Where women didn't have the right to vote. And white women and black women working together for the right to vote. And black women are working with white women. They're working with black men for the right to vote. Only to get sold out by white women and black men. At the end of the day, white women are like, you know, well, maybe you get the right to vote, but really what's important is that we get the right to vote. And men are the same way. They're like, yeah, you know, you're still a woman. You know, maybe we should get the right to vote. We don't know if we care so much. And then women are supposed to smile and be nice about that. Then we're like, well, why are you a bitch? Well, women get jacked up 3-4 different kinds of ways.
Man.
And supposed to take it with a smile. So we do that to each other. It's not even relegated to white and black because black men treat black women pretty bad.
That is a big statement. Are you ready to back that up?
Well, I'm ready. Are you ready? What you got? Give me what you got.
I was born ready. Because I feel like saying that black men treat black women terribly that's pretty loaded. And that
It
is
is. That's why I said it.
Okay. And
So,
I think that is like a sweeping generalization. Okay. And, you know, today I had a little experience and I was at the supermarket, went around this old guy, and then I was turning my cart, and this guy I almost hit him with my cart, and I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I was just trying to go around." And he was like, And then he said, "Nobody cares about anybody anymore." And I let it go, and then he started walking to his car, and I said, "Hey, that's not true. A lot of people care about a lot of people." And I felt really good saying it.
But that's like saying all lives matters, though.
Right. But I did not stand by.
All right.
Stand by. I'm just saying that I felt like I wanted to say something in that moment, and I just had that same feeling. Like when you said that,
and that's what
you know what I mean?
And it's a good feeling. It's a true feeling.
No, I'm like,
but that's what
you
we
never
have to
met
talk
my
about.
cousin Brian. Like, you know, like it makes me. I don't know.
But you know, it's a generalization. But this is how generalizations work, right? The generalization is just that. It doesn't mean every person in the category fits that.
Right. I just feel like it's, I don't know.
So let me flip it on you. Do you feel that in general, black men treat black women well? In general.
In general. I don't feel like I have the basis to answer that question.
Okay.
Honestly. Because, for example, the black men that I know, my answer is yes.
Okay.
Right?
But I'm asking in general.
In general, but
Well, would a more effective question be, do black men treat black women any worse than men as an aggregate treat women as an aggregate? Because to specify black men and black women, I mean, do black men by and large treat black women well? Well, the answer is no, because men by and large don't treat women well.
I will accept that.
So, I mean, I think maybe that's more what Rebecca's getting at, is that if we're going to specify black relationships, I feel like there is an ugly stereotype that racist white people certainly love.
I agree.
That black men walk out on their families and treat their women like shit.
I agree.
It's like
so
we all agree
on that. And though, I don't think it's a but.
Yeah.
I think what you just said is true. And I still have the question underneath that broad umbrella. Do we think that, I'm going to ask it a different way. Sorry. Would you say that black women would say that in general, they are treated well by black men?
Well, judging by the internet, I would say the answer to that is no. I mean, Well,
it's a hard
question. I mean, because
you
you see what we are presented in our media and all that, and like my initial answer to that, like my gut feeling on it was no. Like I'm like no. They're like, that's my king. That's my, you know what I mean? Like this is my man. This is my whatever. And I feel like, but there are a lot of trifling people out there. But I guess I'm kind of scared of what I'm saying. But I feel like what James said is, I think that is, he's kind of getting at like what is like niggling at me when we're talking about this, because I'm like.
So what I would say is that it's complicated.
It's not you. Okay.
Is that it's complicated. It's not one way or the other.
Yeah.
And again, the whole purpose of raising it that way is that these are conversations we should be having. And here's one thing I will say. Normally, I would not say that kind of thing. There's a thing about dirty laundry. There's certain things, critiques I might have about black folks that I keep between black folks.
Right.
Because one thing we're not supposed to do, we don't call. I'll give you an example, but I want to do it this way. So I have this concept of the Stapleton Negro.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's the black man with the white wife and the interracial kids.
Can we clarify real quick? I know we discussed Stapleton at length last time. We don't know how these episodes are going up or whatever.
Right.
But Stapleton is a fairly recent developed area in Denver, designed to be a sort of diverse utopia that happens to be named for a Klansman. And that is certainly by and large dominated by sort of white transplants in tech jobs.
Yeah.
Does that sound fair?
That's right. So it was designed.
This is episode 2.
As, it was designed under this concept of new urbanism that was going to promote diversity and equity. It's 20 years later, and the neighborhood is almost built out, and it's 83% white, and that's when you include the jail population.
I'm sorry. Every time you say that, I'm like, God damn, how could they? Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
It's
no.
so infuriating that they're...
You can't even.
I don't even... You wouldn't mind that they will... It's so irritating that they will count a prison population at the same time that they're trying to, like, prevent felons from voting. It's just so bald-facedly self-serving. It just infuriates me.
It's gross.
Yeah.
And so we're dealing with those issues. And so first I have this concept of the Stapleton Negro, because if you look at the black folks that Forest City promotes, it's the black man with the white wife and the interracial children. Mm-hmm. And not only did we, and I used to be one of those. And we're on all the committees and this, and then part of what our role is, and people don't even ask us to do it, is we become the black voice of the stuff, right? So when Chris Herndon gets up, every time we bring up the name Stapleton, then as our councilman and representative, he'll get up and say, well, I think we have other things to do, and I'm black and I'm not offended with the name. It's okay with me. So here's what I want to say about that. Here's what I want to say about that. I've been in meetings, several now, where he's done that same thing. And I look at him and I say something nice and white and diplomatic. But then when we talk offline, I'm like, look, you know what that is, right? Mm-hmm. And I have other words, well, like Stapleton Negro, which is kind of nice, because I could say house nigga, I could say a lot of other things. But my point of talking about it here is Uncle Tom, yes.
It's a classic.
But what I want to say for this part of the conversation here is, we don't talk about this as an unspoken agreement, but there's talk that black folks will have amongst themselves that we won't do in public. Mm-hmm. So that you would never hear me in mixed company say something about how in general, black men treat black women. But I will do it among black people, because it's a hot topic. But we don't do that in mixed company.
Can I ask though, how does that work from the perspective of someone who isn't in that conversation anyway? But how does that work? Going back to Rebecca's poll, if we know that 40% of black millennials think that black Americans need to be pulling themselves up by their bootstraps like Italians and Irishmen, etc. And if 28%, was it, of black millennials think there's no difference between Black Lives Matter and a white supremacist group, is that an outdated assumption that there's a separate backdoor conversation? It sounds like, I'm shocked by those numbers personally. I'm shocked that 28% of, how old do you have to be? I think I'm considered just slightly too old to be a millennial. So you're talking about people in their 20s, basically, when you're talking about millennials. You're talking about
I think you're a millennial.
Am I? Born in 83? I guess 80, maybe?
Yeah.
Okay. So people in their 20s to mid 30s.
Yeah.
Right.
If you had told me, and again, I don't know the methodology of this study. I don't know maybe it's a sample size of 300 people. Who knows?
Right.
But if you had told me that 28% of African Americans my age consider Black Lives Matter to be equivalent to the Klan.
Yeah.
Right.
that would be absolutely shocking to me. Right. So is that in itself, are there notions of solidarity that are sort of breaking
Well, that's
down?
what we were talking about before. I mean, we are making assumptions that millennials have the same experience, and we just assume they're just with the group. Mm-hmm. And we made a mistake because we can't make the assumption. Number two, what I just talked about what quote unquote we do. Well, again, it's a generalization because not all black people do it. Mm-hmm. And less so, are we having these kinds of conversations with our young kids. So it's not universally true. So it's true and it's untrue if people can handle that. People get hurt. And people come back to work and got these elaborate knee braces. And I'm like, I'm not trying. I'm like, just the even possibility of that takes the fun out of it for me.
No, I don't get. I don't swim, so I can. I barely can swim. I really shouldn't even say that I can. When Azalea was born in 2012, I got some idea in my head. I should learn how to swim already. And I went to the Y.
You were breaking up some stereotypes. I'm like, this white guy can't swim.
Well,
what the fuck?
That's funny.
Well, I didn't
even know that happened.
So there's a racial stereotype about, white people swim and black people don't. Mm-hmm. There's also geographical stereotypes. In the South and in a lot of the country, the joke is that New Yorkers can't swim.
Yeah.
And it's fucking true. It's really true. And it's true. I can't. My father cannot swim. His father could not swim. And I never learned to swim. Ever. Mm-hmm. Not even tread water.
Wow.
And I got this idea in my head, like, I should just, even if it's just to do it and like feel like I did it, I just feel like I should learn to swim. I went to the Y and I took like 2 months worth of swimming lessons, primarily with, 11-year-olds.
Yeah.
I just did it. I just sucked it up.
At the Oakland Y?
The Oakland Y.
That's my jam.
Yeah, on Telegraph. And I did, first I had fucking fin feet, whatever, and then eventually the class ended when I could do 2 laps unassisted as a swimmer. And that's the last time I ever swam. I finally did it and I felt a little accomplished. And then I was like, why? This isn't even fun. And whenever I hear about somebody drowning or some horrible accident in the water or something, my response is always, "Oh, that's awful, but what are you doing? We can't breathe that stuff. What are you?
That is hilarious.
Why are you in there?
You are blowing my mind right now, dude.
Do you understand? You've got a pair of lungs that pulls oxygen from the air, and if they fill with water, you die. Mm-hmm. Why are you in there? You're not. So that's not for you.
I love to swim, but anyway, that's crazy.
But you know what? Crazy. This is a perfect. So you swim.
Yeah, my mom was like an excellent
and you don't
swimmer.
swim. So this is a perfect 1.5. Because here's my thing.
Do you swim?
I don't swim. I technically can swim because I went to a black college.
Yeah.
And when you go to a black college, you cannot graduate unless you pass a swimming class. Mm. And so I technically can swim. And you have to, so to pass the class, I had to swim the length of an Olympic-sized swimming pool. And I did that, and I got a B in swimming. I can get, as long as I can see, I can get around from place to place on a pool. But in terms of swimming, I
think the stereotype that black people don't swim is really a stereotype that urban people don't swim. It seems to me, I don't think it's a race thing. Surely,
okay, but then there
kids
is
in
this.
The country swim in the creek.
Yeah, but then there's also this, and this is not America. This is Jamaica. We are constantly meeting Jamaicans that cannot swim.
That's
and
funny.
we're like, what are you saying? You live on this cliff next to this water, and you know what I mean. So it's like very crazy to me. Like I have all these like
hilarious.
Jamaicans I know that cannot swim and just do not go in the water.
That is funny. And don't go in the. See, I'll go in the water.
Yeah, but then like my dad's not a strong swimmer. And like my dad, but growing up, he always, you know, he goes in the water, he swim a little bit, but he, you know, wears his nose pinchers. Mm-hmm. And when we're in Jamaica, like he wears a life jacket and stuff. And like, you know, he always did that because he's smart and he's like, I'm not a good, strong swimmer. But my mom, my mom was like, my mom was like on the swim team. And that was like one of his first dates that he took my mom on. He told me the story. Yeah, he said that like he like took her to the pool and he was like going to show off. You know, he was like, I'm going to take her to this pool. And yeah, you know, and it's like, and then my mom was like, and just like dove in the water and was like, and then my dad was like, oh, maybe we should just splash around here. And like didn't.
That's hilarious.
He's got a snorkel and floaties.
You know, I can't swim, but I just, when you said it though, and it's not that interesting, but it's just personal, is I had this boyfriend in college that, you know, we were like in bed, and then I don't know how it came up, and he was like, oh, black people sink when they swim because, you know, their bones are heavier. And I was like, what?
Wow.
I'm like, what? Like, I'm in bed with this dude.
Is that wild?
And he's saying some shit like that to me, and it was very crazy to me, and it's like kind of true.
That's funny.
Because like there is something to like the density in the boat. Like there is something to it.
You heard it here, folks.
That's funny.
But when that kind of thing happens, you're like, holy shit! Like, damn! Like we have not come very far. You know, when people say feel like comfortable, but I mean, you know, he was my boyfriend or whatever. But still, I remember that. Like I don't remember anything else about that dude, but I remember that.
There you go.
And that's why we are not married today.
Dense bones.
Yeah. No, it's true.
I never heard that one.
Actually, you know what? Maybe it's not fucking true. I've never...
Of course it's not true. There's no...
I know it's true.
Yeah. There's no bone density difference.
I'm going to look it up.
Not that I know of, but we've got some anthropologists in our group.
I'm going to find out because I feel like... I think it's true, though. I feel like I looked it up afterwards.
That's funny.
And I feel like... Yeah, are black people's bones... This is coming up immediately on the Google search.
I have never in my life heard
black people's bones heavier than white?
That can't...
It is like the first thing that comes up, okay? Racial differences in bone strength, okay? Bone density. But I feel like you're right. It can't be true. Oh, shit. You guys. James, your face. James got his face.
Well, first of all, what does weight have to do with it? I mean, an aircraft carrier is heavy.
Okay, but
that's not how swimming works. That's not what buoyancy is about, how heavy it is.
I don't know. I'm not good at science, but this says this study tested whether racial differences in bone density can be explained by differences in bone metabolism and lifestyle. There are differences in bone density.
My mind is fucking blown right now.
This is crazy. Let's read the conclusion. Okay. We concluded that racial differences in bone mineral density are not accounted for by clinical or biochemical variables measured in early adulthood. What does that mean?
It means it's not about the metabolism and stuff.
Oh, but the bones are denser.
They're acknowledging a difference in bone density.
Yeah.
Huh.
Okay. Well, anyway, someone else can research that because I don't have time for that right now. But I'm just saying... Those kind of things can leave a mark on you, and you don't know. You don't know what, you know. And I'm sure everyone has that experience, right? Where it's like the thing you remember that made you feel a certain way or made you aware of like your whiteness or your blackness or your otherness. Yeah. Right? Did you have an experience? May I ask you that, Dr. J? He's not a doctor.
Did I have an experience with
when
my...
you, like,
no,
realize...
I can't. I have regular bones. I just can't swim. I don't have... It's not a bone thing. No, I don't know what you mean. What are you asking me?
Like, when you recognize... Did you... Like, that white lady that has that book, the Waking Up White book? Mm-hmm. What's her name?
I forgot her name.
Yeah. Let's not give her a shout out. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry. She's okay. Anyway.
We'll paste it in later.
No, but she, like, this idea, like, you wake up to your whiteness, like, when you realized, a moment. Do you have a moment when you realized you were white?
Oh, wow. Dag. Wow. I didn't know you were going there. Wow.
I don't know if I can answer that question, but I can definitely redirect to something I'm more comfortable talking about.
White.
No, I'm just kidding.
White.
No, I don't know if I can answer that question. I don't... I think for me, it's been much more of like a social thing. Like, I think the first time, shortly after high school, I went to go work for a comedy club in New York City. And that meant that I always had like front row seats to comedy shows, which meant that I was always being picked on by comics, which I was always like happy to do because I think that's great. But I remember, like, I know it sounds ridiculous because I'm a pretty white person in every kind of way. Physically, the way I speak, my everything. But I remember the first time that like a black comic referred to me as being really white. And it like hurt my feelings. Like I thought I was cooler than that. Like I thought that I was, and I wasn't. I wasn't. And I'm old enough now that I don't get, my identity doesn't have to be like based around that, around feeling like somebody thinks I'm down or whatever. But like at that age, like, you know, comic picked on me, asked me a question. I answered the question. His joke might not have even been based on anything. It might have just been, he was a comic getting out of the bit, moving to the next thing. And he was just like, oh, this is the whitest fucking guy I ever met in my life or whatever. Moved on to the next thing. And I remember that kind of like stung. I was like, oh, I'm like really white? Like, I don't know. It was a weird thing. Wow. That's probably the only moment that I can think of where I was like, you know, I was always pretty awake to privilege and stuff like that. But I think that was the first time where I was like, oh, like I'm not pulling it off. I'm not like tricking anybody. Nobody doesn't know that I'm a really white guy in this room right now. Like, you know, that's as close as I can get. Okay. I don't know if I had a moment that I was like awake to whiteness.
Yeah.
In youth. I mean, certainly like as an adult, I notice it, but.
Just sorry to sideline.
No, it's good.
I'm kind of curious about that because I don't need you to ask me that question, and Greg, we don't need that question because we know we have our moments.
I've had many moments, but I've actually had one. I'll give one example, but I do have moments where I forget that I'm black. So one of the first times I was young, I was either in college, just out of college, but I went to a historically black college. And a psychology major, and what was fun about that was I got a job at Meharry Medical College. They had a community mental health center, so I got to, you know, do my little psychology stuff. And it's a historically the medical college is historically black as well, and so I got a job in the community center, and I worked with the kids. I was young, 18, 19, 20. And at that point in my life, I'd been doing like all black. All my socialization was black, you know. But I wound up getting another job, in addition to the job, at a psychiatric hospital way out in the suburbs of Nashville, Tennessee, and the white suburbs, and even the hospital. It was white. It was mostly white people, and the kids I work with, they're white. And I'm young, and I do the stuff. And it's out in the suburbs, and we, you know, I worked with kids, and a lot of the kids that we work with not only had mental health issues, but they were juvenile delinquents. They had a court case, this, that, and the other. So one day, I do what I do. It wasn't even a therapy thing. We were just out in the field with the kids playing football. And after a little bit, one of the white young men, 14 years old or something, he decided, I'm going to make my break for it. And he just starts running. Well, you know, I'm 22 years old, former track star, this, that, and the other. I'm like, shoot, I'm going to walk that kid down. So I just start taking off after him. And he's running, and I was starting to get old. So just about the time I got tired and was going to have to let him go, I was still like 100 yards, about 70 yards away from him. And I had to stop and start walking. I was like, well, but then he stopped and was walking too. So I caught my breath faster than he did, and I just ran him down, tackled him, and holding him because the other staff were going to be coming. Well, I didn't even think about it. All of a sudden, people are coming out of their homes. There's this black man on this white kid, And they're like, what's going on here? And I'm like, oh, shit, I'm in trouble. I'm all the way, like, up in this neighborhood, and nobody knows what's going on, and I might have made a mistake here. But luckily, the other staff came and were able to explain things. But it's like, I forgot. I'm black. I can't just do that.
Yeah.
I can't just do that. It was like, ooh, my bad.
But damn, don't you feel like it's still happening? That still happens to you.
Oh, yeah. Well, so I have those moments. And yeah, sometimes I forget. It's a crazy thing. Sometimes I forget. It's like, oh.
Now that is interesting to me, and this may not be anywhere where we wanted to be going, but because I feel like as mixed race person, I feel like I never forget.
Wow. How about that?
Like never. And I feel like now since I started doing my film projects and stuff, I started connecting with all these other like mixed race people, a lot of people who are mixed with black particularly, but just this idea, like we think about race, I feel like more than people who are so-called monoracial. I don't have that experience,
but that makes sense to me.
Like I'm not
So let me ask you a question about that, because I don't know. If you were to describe the kind of life that you're just everyday life, do you live a mixed race life?
I think now more I do. I think so. Because I've sort of started identifying as multiracial, whereas I
multiracial. So is that? So I said mixed race. Should I say multiracial?
You can say whatever you want, really. I mean, I don't know, because this is new to me. Because up until like 5 years ago, I identified as black always. How
about that? Wow.
And I actually had a black girlfriend of mine say, "Oh, I didn't know you identified as black," and I was like, well, I do, but
wow, see?
But that was something. But that's because I'm a kid of the '80s. You know what I mean? Like I couldn't. You couldn't be mixed. Mm-hmm. You had to be black or white. That's just the way it was.
So it's how then you see yourself, not in terms of just how you describe yourself, but how you live. Is there a difference between how you lived and see yourself when you identified black and now that you identify multiracial?
Well, it's kind of interesting to me, I guess, because I think I see it through the eyes of other people. I have a couple of friends who went to college with me in New York that have coincidentally moved out to Colorado. And they remember me as the black girl in the theater department.
Wow.
And they were like, you had an afro. And I did, because I had short hair and I cut my hair and my hair's curly and it grew a certain way. And I was like pretty militant in college because I was like getting woke or whatever at that time. And I don't know. I mean, I feel like now, but now being in a marriage with another mixed race person and having a mixed child who presents as white, I feel like I do identify more as mixed or multiracial, as opposed to before I used to only identify as black. Mm-hmm. And anyway, but I just was saying that because I feel like you said you forgot, and I feel, and I don't think that's like I think that is common for a lot of black people,
I don't know, yeah.
Well, we don't know, because we're just us sitting here talking about it, but I do think that's like, you think about your race every day, probably. Mm-hmm. That was something my white mother used to say. She'd say, what I learned from being married to your father was white people in America never think about race, and black people think about it every day.
All the time. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's like how rich people don't think about money.
Right.
Like it's,
Yeah. Yeah. So that
you're not forced to think about it.
Yeah, but when you're mixed and somebody is, that's the other thing. It's like people are constantly asking me like what my race is, or what my background is. And so of course when someone asks you that every day of your life, literally every day, how do you?
Yeah, you can't. It's
and I feel like now the word is getting out that that's like rude to ask people that. So I feel like it has kind of died down a little bit, but it's still it still happens, of course.
It's interesting. I'm I'm going to think maybe in like a week I'll have some answer for you of when I realized whiteness was a thing, because I don't know when I did.
Mm-hmm. And I love that you just said that, because I think that is also the heart of us being able to like make any kind of difference that we can, is that people need to sit and think about shit.
Yeah.
And like really think about it and just take a minute, because I feel like I'm starting to do that now more. Like I said, with my identity and then having my kid and doing this movie and interviewing people and talking to people and stuff, like I'm thinking a lot more and more deeply, and I feel like I'm being more reflective, and I want to encourage that in other people too. So I feel like that's something, I like that. Mm-hmm. Good job, James.
Thanks. The bar is very low. I said I would think about one thing for a week. That's
I'm like, good job. Oh, he's such a good white people. Yes.
That's hilarious.
So then here we'll cue in some music. We don't know what we're doing.
It's okay.
That's okay.
Feels good, though.
Off Color is brought to you by Tan Tigress Productions, hosted by Rebecca Henderson, produced by me, James Meekum. I also do the theme music. The music you hear during the break is a song called Drown by a band called Wake Up Electrified. You can find that on Bandcamp or Spotify. Follow us on Twitter at offcolorpod, Facebook at offcolorpodcast. Our website is offcolorpod.com. You can subscribe on Stitcher, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and anywhere else you get podcasts. This episode in particular is dedicated to the loving memory of our friend, Dr. Gregory Diggs. Thanks for listening.
All right, we're going to take a little break right now. God damn it, James.
It's just this voice that you go to.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors.
I like that, okay?
We have to get some real like smooth jazz music to go under that.
It's just one of my voices that I do.
This has been over a 2.5 hour conversation.
That's too long.